Welcome to The Passion Pod with your host, Chris Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the feature presentation.
Season 5, Episode 1.
Welcome back, friends. Today we're hanging out on a rooftop in Hollywood with a man of many hats. Our guest today is an owner of an agency that represents a large variety of people, from Courtney Love to Bryce Fine to DaBaby, a bunch of people, not to mention his photography and music career, which we'll get to. Welcome to the show, Scott Lips.
What's up, my brother? How are you?
Dude, so good. This is really cool. I've never been on a rooftop. Yeah.
We're wearing masks. We're hanging out. It's
Yeah.
COVID times, but it is nice to do it in person if you can. I did one in person actually here, maybe 3 months ago with an actor named Jack Houston, and it was great because we have such a great vibe and we've known each other for years. So it's great. It's just people are, I guess like me, they're still freaked out about what's going on in life, but what a pleasure to sit with someone in person.
Yeah, it's nice, man. I mean, there's obviously the multiple effects, right, of like staying inside. You stay a little bit healthier, but your mental health deteriorates. And I get it. There's a lot of problems. Coming from Wisconsin, it's not quite as prevalent because we don't have a tight-knit community there. There's not as many people crammed into a space. But the fact that we're up here in the open air on a rooftop, sitting apart, wearing masks, This is cool that we can at least still do this.
I think we're like 4 feet, so
yeah, maybe
I might
we're
move back a little bit, but
we have signs in Wisconsin that say
like,
stay at least one cow length apart.
Right. Oh my God. It's LA, so it's like one palm tree apart or whatever it is. Right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So just because not everyone listening to my show is already familiar with you, you have a huge whatever. You're involved in a lot of things, but who are you and what are you passionate about?
Sure. So the question, who are you? How do you answer that question in 30 seconds? I'll give you my best summary. I started many years ago as a musician, so that's really the essence and soul of where I come from. I still play drums with Courtney Love. We don't tour that often, but we did like the Lana Del Rey tour. I guess it was 3 years ago. The last year and a half is a blur, so whether it's 3 or 4 years ago, I can't really tell you because it's basically like we're all erasing the last year or two from our lives because it's sort of like, did anything happen? Was anything going on? But that was the last major tour we did. We did a show 2019, Yola Dia, which is a big music festival with like Megan Thee Stallion and Cat Power, Leaky Lee, a bunch of artists. So that's the last time I performed live. That was like the summer before COVID. So I'm imagining most bands, last time they played live was either really early last year or unless they're doing these virtual things, like there's not much going on, right? So that's the essence of who I am. I moved out to LA at a young age to play music. I joined this band called Black Cherry. It was part of the Guns N' Roses history. The lead singer of my band back then was in a band that became Guns N' Roses. So, I had the crazy long hair. I looked like I never did drugs, by the way, but I looked like I was like a crazy member of Guns N' Roses with long blonde hair and the leather pants. And, it was a cross between, I looked like the drummer of Guns N' Roses, Steven Adler, meets like Jim Morrison when I was a lot younger. So that's where I come from. Many years ago, I started working on the business end of music when I wasn't on tour because I really liked business. So I worked for the Chili Peppers manager early on. I worked at record labels, but I was like, you know what? I don't actually want to work at these places as like an intern or assistant. I want to own one of these labels. I want to own one of these management companies. And I was only 24, 25. And at a certain point, when I started playing drums with one of the bands I ended up playing with, who eventually became what is now Steel Panther. It's like a big
I'm familiar.
fictitious metal band, whatever you want to call them. At a certain point when I was playing with them, I hurt my arm on tour. We were actually a disco band before Steel Panther. We used to play disco, and it was called the Boogie Nights. And there was like 12 versions of the Boogie Nights playing disco everywhere. It was all these guys that were in hard rock bands, metal bands. We couldn't make a living. We might have had record deals. Our bands might have been doing well, but nobody was making real money unless you really made it. So we actually started this disco craze in LA. It took off, and we were each getting like whatever it was, $500, $1,000 a night playing disco, like rock and roll guys. And we were so jazzed just to be making money. And I overdid it. I had an injury to my arm, and I wanted to own one of these companies, and I wasn't getting anywhere because people looked at me as a musician still at these companies. So I would work at like Arista Records. I work at different record labels, Elektra Records. And they were like, hey, kid, get us some coffee or, go through these cassettes and find us an artist that makes sense. But eventually I said to my mom, like, they all look at me as like an artist, not as like somebody who could own one of these companies. And she said, your cousin owns some kind of like model agency. Maybe you can work there until your arm gets better. And truth be told, I started working for a cousin of mine's company. It was a very big agency, and I was like the driver. So pre-Uber, people with talent would come to LA and they didn't know how to get around town because we didn't, models, people like that, they couldn't take like Uber, or they couldn't take taxis to like 7 castings in LA. One's in Alhambra, one's in, wherever, Laguna Beach. It just wasn't convenient. So agencies would hire drivers. By the way, I don't even like driving. I'm like the worst driver. But back then, I had to figure it out. So I did that. And then, quickly I just realized, I didn't see a lot of people in that business with a real vision. So I was like, I guess if you take music and fashion and film and combine all these things and have an agency representing people for like endorsements and things like that. And this is sort of when like actors were doing a ton of endorsements. And eventually, whatever, I worked my way up. I became an agent. I went to another company. I ran a company. And then at some point, like in 2001, I started and founded that agency in New York called One Management. I think I was probably the first agent, founder, whatever you might call it, in the fashion business, modeling business, or one of the first for sure to work with influencers. So many years ago when, people were like, what do you mean you're going to charge people, like someone to post a photo, like a brand, you're going to charge them money? They're just going to throw that in, the talent. I'm like, no, they're going to pay for that. Like, if Hugo Boss wants someone to post a picture after their fashion show, they got to pay for that. It's another kind of usage. So that was interesting because the first couple of years of doing that in the fashion modeling business, like nobody wanted to pay. And so people were looking at like, hey, it's cheap. It doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? And look where we're at now. I mean, I'd say that digital business, whether you want to call it creators, influencers, I think it's a bigger business than for sure the modeling business. So, and I was very early on too, working with celebrities for endorsements. So I worked with people like A$AP Rocky early on and a lot of great celebrities in helping to build their fashion careers. And they were super talented on their own and getting a lot of stuff on their own. But, I really helped, whether it was like a Vogue cover or campaigns that led to them building this incredible fashion profile. So, yeah, now, it's been, I guess, 4 years I've been in LA, the last year and a half. Does that count for anyone?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Kind of.
But, I mean, just in the sense that, like, life has not been normal. But, yeah, we represent, I think I have, like, when I left New York, there was, like, whatever it may be, 26 people working there. It's still, the agency's still obviously in existence. Out here, I have something like 9 or 10 already. And, we have a lot of great influencers, a lot of great big celebrities that I work with. Also, so they have other teammates, and models. And so I've been doing it for eons. So in essence, a musician. I still get to play with Courtney when I can. I also host a podcast called Lip Service, which thankfully has been trending top 25 on Spotify.
Congratulations.
Thank you, which is not easy, but in the music section, which is great. So super excited about that. I've been working hard on that, and it kind of stemmed out of this radio show I started doing on Dash Radio, which is like kind of like a Sirius or something. And so you mentioned photography. At a certain point, I dabbled in that and had a couple photo shows, put out a book. It's funny when you meet people in LA and they say they do like 16 things. You're like, do you really? Because no one works out here. And you're like, how could you do all those things, But I'm from New York, so I don't know. I moved out from New York, and I always, like, hustled. And hustling is, like, part of my vocabulary, It's part of where I come from. My dad was hustling and working hard and driving to the Bronx every morning at 5:30 in the morning and coming back at night, 9 at night, 8 at night. And he'd put in, like, crazy long hours, and that's where I get that work ethic from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people say that all the time about people from the Midwest, too, in general. You know what I mean? We're just like hardworking class of America or whatever. And I think it tends to be true. There's a lot more, at least I've noticed in the short time that I've been out here, that people, at least right away, kind of have this like wall up of like who they're pretending to be or who they want to be or whatever.
Yeah.
But then when you're just working hard and you're just genuine talking to people, that wall disappears really fast.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's like special when they see somebody that's just really straightforward or what, but I mean, anyways, coming from an area like that, you're just kind of used to working. And you've obviously hustled a lot. I'll get to that just because I'm really wondering about it. But I want to take it back a little bit because I have a question about this because things change, right? Things evolve over time. And I love how you mentioned with, one of the reasons that made your management company work so well is you worked with influencers.
Yeah.
So
still do.
You still do work with influencers. Yeah. So I had this guest on the show a while back. His name's Andrew Cannon. He's a retired pro skateboarder, and he's the brand manager for Santa Cruz. If you're familiar with that brand, it's pretty big.
Sure.
Well, I was talking to him about challenges of like social media and stuff because things are changing the way like the magazine doesn't really have the same influence. The videos don't anymore now. Instagram does. And he made a really good point of saying like, well, The thing is if everything stayed the same, you'd have such a disadvantage because the people doing it for 30 years would know what they were doing, and you wouldn't be able to break in very easily. So rather than looking at it as like a problem, you just look at it as an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Of like, no one's doing this yet. Nobody has it really figured out. If I'm just hustling right away at the forefront of it, I have the most advantage of anybody to try to make this successful. You just can't get stuck in your ways and realize like, hey, times are changing. It's meant to evolve.
Yeah.
There's new opportunities that are out there.
I mean, I love just kind of go back to what you're saying. I love new tech. I mean, I'm even very, very active already on Clubhouse, right? And people are like, what's Clubhouse? Like, how do I get an invite? Like, the minute that I heard about it, I started getting very involved. And so it's so important for me to be involved in new technology when it starts. I mean, I sometimes like Google this article because it kind of makes me laugh, but it kind of upsets me. I'm friendly and was friendly with I don't see them that much anymore, but the Winklevoss twins who started Facebook. And years ago, they were trying to get me to like pay my talent in Bitcoin. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't understand what you're talking about. You have to mine a coin. I mean, look at where this thing, I mean, if I had just listened to them, like, although it wasn't just me, right? I would have had to gone explaining, at that point, it was just like models I was working with. Hey, you're going to get paid in Bitcoin. They would have been like, what is that? Because this was like 10 years ago, and maybe more, whenever they sort of got really involved in it. So, but I sometimes Google the article because it comes up and I'm just reminded on, you know, how early I was trying to be on the forefront of things, but it was too early, right? Sometimes it's like, and I remember introducing those guys to some heavy hitters, and even they passed on the idea of Bitcoin. And, you know, I won't mention the band name that passed on it, but a major band. But someone that worked for their like road crew invested and made millions. So It's always interesting. But in answer to sort of what you're saying, like, yeah, new tech and just being on the forefront of ideas and concepts and where it's going, like, I don't know. I think you always need to evolve. And so even with my business, like today I just did this little thing with another company that we're working with. And I'm like, you know what? I don't even mind changing the name because it's a new chapter of the company. So it's always interesting for me to evolve. And I think you have to, especially if you're artistic, right? You obviously are. I am. I do all these creative things. That's how my brain operates. So I think it's really good to just evolve in every sense.
I mean, just when you do anything creative in that way, especially like art, you realize there's no rules within that, which then translates to realizing there aren't really rules to how the world works in the first place, right? Those are just imaginary ones, right, that people put up because of the industry thinks it's supposed to be that way, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
And then especially when you're an entrepreneur, at some point you realize, whoa, I really don't have any rules. Now I can make choices that don't end up being successful for me and may end up being bad ones or whatever, but nobody can tell me what I can and can't do.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit to like the promotion side of it, just because times change so fast, which is what we're kind of talking about. I know at least what I read, your first kind of like time frame going into like the marketing and stuff side of it, the promotion stuff was when you were in that band Black Cherry way back when, right?
Yeah.
And you're doing flyers and stuff, I assume, trying to like get people to go to shows.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up,
Do you remember flyers? A lot of people don't remember.
Yeah, I remember. So I'm 30. I'm like young, but not that young. So, but when I was growing up, we dabbled on Photoshop, right?
Yeah.
So that was like a class pretty much. It's called print graphics. So in high school, took that class. You dink around on Photoshop. You make this thing, and then you go to the library and you scan it, make 100 copies, and you give them out for your art show or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You obviously didn't have Photoshop when you were doing this because this was late 80s, early 90s or whatever.
Yeah, we didn't have
So what did you, like, how is the marketing working, like the guerrilla marketing side? How did you do that?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, back in the late 80s, early 90s, for bands that wanted to make it, I mean, God, think about how archaic it is compared to where we were now, right? Like, no cell phones, right? And so the only way you could really get the word out about when bands used to play, like Guns N' Roses would make their own flyers. I don't know if they used stencils. Like, I'm not an art director, but I remember like either myself or like other guys in my band would like, it's probably like one of my guitar player might have done it, or my bass, I can't remember. One of us did it. I don't think I actually designed the flyers, but you know, one of us would design it, and then we would people would go to like parking lots. You'd go to like the Forum, as I mentioned, Guns N' Roses or Poison or the bands at that time that were really breaking. You know, they would just plaster every car in the Forum parking lot with these flyers. And kind of a funny little, you know, antidote, you know, like we would put flyers up on telephone poles back then. It was a thing, and then other bands would come along and put theirs on top of ours, and people would keep doing it. You know, it was just like getting as much visibility as you can, stick them wherever you can, you know, make stickers, put them on the, you know, on the sidewalk. I mean, you have to remember the Sunset Strip back then was, God, there was like, on the weekends, there was thousands of people lined up just, you know, to the hilt. Like, the women were wearing like leather and lace, and the guys were like shirtless, and it was such a weird, crazy scene. I don't think it'll ever come back to, you know, to that kind of I don't know what you would call it. It was like this rock and roll debauchery. But it was all about self-promotion. So most of the bands would actually pass out the flyers by hand. That was a big thing we'd have to do. Like, what are you doing Tuesday night? I don't know. Let's go to the, whoever Iggy Pop is playing at the Scream. Let's go pass out flyers like downstairs. Or, Guns N' Roses playing in, the Cat House. Let's go outside and pass out the flyers, right? So without the internet, which is kind of hard to imagine, like a world without the net, because it's like, it's only like 15 years old. I don't know how old it is. Is it 20 years old?
Yeah, probably about 20.
But like, it's kind of hard to even imagine a time before then, right? But it was just like, I mean, I don't want to sound archaic, but like, even like meeting people, hey, let me leave a message on your answering machine. If you don't show up, I don't know, I guess you can page me. If not, if you're not there, you're not there. What a weird concept now, right? But like, everything's at our fingertips. Everything's so immediate. There's nothing that we can't pull up in Google. There's nothing that we can't have at our fingertips right away in a second. But back then, it was really, you had to hustle. Like, any bands that were lazy, honestly, they probably didn't make it.
Yeah.
And that was like part of, I mean, I don't, whether I like a band like Poison or not, they weren't my favorite out of all those bands. I thought they looked cool and they had some really catchy songs. But from what I remember and what I know, and I know the history of that band, they hustled like no one's business. Those guys were out there passing out flyers till the day they got their record deal and exploded, right? They were killing it. It's like, it's really, I hate to sound so cliche, but I even talk about it on things like Clubhouse. Like, it is the hustle, because, with Clubhouse now, a lot of people call in, they just want advice. And especially in this influencer marketing space, whatever you might call it. And people will say, I have 5,000 followers. I really want to monetize it. And I'm like, well, you can't. Like, you got to put the work in. Like, you got to build it up so you have something to say. You're creating great content. You have 50, 100, a million followers, 50,000, a million followers, whatever it may be. So that brands look at you and they want to invest in paying you. If you have 5,000 and you're a nano or micro influencer, it may not be what they're looking for. So there isn't a get rich quick scheme. There isn't a secret antidote that I have where I can tell you, if you have a couple thousand followers, how to make $1 million. Like, it doesn't really work like that. You really have to put the work in it and build up that profile that you have.
Yeah.
So I only brought that up because I feel like it ties into what we're talking about marketing.
I know, like, when you say, okay, so how do I go from 2,000 followers to monetize and have 1 million? That's a huge story. There's a lot of ways to get there. That's a whole thing. So we're not going to get into that. However, as far as like a quick little scenario, because I wonder what you would do with this, because you're in a totally different space now as far as like what money you can put in, who you have contact, whatever. Let's say you didn't have any contact and you're trying to promote your band in today's world, right? And you have $1,000 to spend on doing this show and promoting it. It's going to be 1 month out. How would you choose to spend that $1,000 in that 1 month trying to set something up to better yourself?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I would hope that I had a lot of friends, right? Because a lot of this stuff is just like, it's volume, right? It's like you see something everywhere and then you're like, it's FOMO. You're like, oh, I need to be part of what that is, right? Like, it used to be pre-COVID, like everybody would be in Aruba, or everybody would be in Salt Lake City, or everybody would be, whatever festival. It's like, I need to be at Burning Man. Like, everyone's there, Do you really need to be at Burning Man, or are you having FOMO, right? So I would probably hit up like every friend I had in the world and be like, hey, could you repurpose? Can you, restory this, my podcast, whatever it may be. And then I would probably take a little bit of money and find out who would want to promote it, right? And so, again, 1,000 wouldn't get you very far. Like, I don't know, like, I guess I could offer people $100 each, 10 people, or, if you start offering people like less than that, it's almost like really insulting. So I don't really even go to people for that kind of money myself, but it would be a lot of favors. I guess even with my show, it's one of those things, Chris, when I started, like, I called them favors, right? Like, people, even now, when people ask me to do whatever, like, I don't know, whatever. I'm super grateful that my show's been doing well and I have a great history. I'm thankful if anybody wants to hear me say anything, right? But, but it is like the same questions people ask me, like, who's on the show? What is it? How many people listen? So I would pull in favors. Like, I call up, I'm friendly with Anthony Kiedis from the Peppers, and I'd be like, hey, will you come on my show? Luckily I have a great rapport and we're good friends, right? But, it's hard. In the beginning, it's really, people are just like, you got to really lean on people, because unless you're Joe Rogan or unless you're Mark Maron or whoever it may be, like, this is a hustle too, right? Like, I think when I started in the podcast space 3 years ago, it was like a Dash radio show that became a podcast, but I don't know. I had heard back then there was 1 million podcasts. I hear now there's over 2 million. So it's doubled in the last couple of years, right? It might be more than that. I don't have the official number. I'm sure you could probably pull it up somewhere. But it's always a hustle, right? It's just like it's a lot of leading on people and just being like, hey, will you help me out? Like, I promise you, if I do well with this, I'll take care of you down the road, right? So it's nothing changes. I always believe that, like, if you treat people well and you have good karma and you ask them for stuff, like, if you can take care of them later on, you will in whatever capacity. So
yeah, well, I read a quote from you anyways a while ago that you said, what you put in the world is what you get back, right? Yeah. And I think that's the case when you're talking about, like,
where was that from? I don't even remember.
I don't remember which article.
Was that me or was that Joe Rogan?
No,
I'm
was
joking.
You. That was you. Sounding incredibly intelligent.
Thank you.
But
I must have stolen that from someone. I don't know where I got that.
It could be. I have a saying that I live by, and I like to say, I plan for tomorrow but live for today.
Yeah.
And people ask me, where'd you hear that? I'm like, dude, I don't know. I don't think I made it.
It's definitely in some book somewhere.
Right, I'm like, I couldn't have made it up.
Yeah.
So you're talking about leaning on people, but really the cool thing is, and we talked about this off mic before we even started this, was if you're just genuine and you're hardworking and you're kind, people tend to want to help you.
Yeah.
They really do, because I think they also know that, hey, in the future, I can tell this guy's going to be working hard and doing these cool things, and it'll come back. It will. You don't do things necessarily always with the idea of, like, I'm going to get something out of this, but when you're kind and you help people out and you work hard, it tends to come back to you over time.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how many millions of people live in this zone.
Definitely.
You're going to run into the same people.
Yeah.
It's just what's going to happen, especially when you get into a more niche industry or space. You're just going to run into those people all the time.
And I believe in karma. I think if you treat people well, like I said, and you put it out there in the universe, it'll hopefully come back to you. So.
Yeah. So when you were doing the Black Cherry stuff, from what I read or from what I understand, you were trying to do some kind of management stuff, and then you got this job driving, like you said, and then you kind of worked your way up through that. Why weren't you able to just do your management company right at the beginning? What were the struggles? Was it because you felt you just really weren't ready for that, or like?
Well, honestly, I really, you need some type of training about doing something, right? I was just a drummer and I was managing my band. We had this guy Kenny Kerner who produced Kiss early on. Like, he was managing the band. We had this other guy Philip that was managing the band. But as a drummer, it's funny. Like, you're only worth like what you can bring to the table, because you're usually not the songwriter. And if you're not the songwriter, and you're not the one like contributing to the writing or the lyrics or the melody, and I will say most drummers probably don't. I mean, every band is different, right? I'm sure there are a ton of drummers that do that, but there's a ton of drummers that don't. You got to make yourself useful. So I just like took the reins, and whether it was like co-managing or helping or whatever it may be, like I was doing that. But in the fashion industry, that I didn't even know that, like, I fell into that by accident, only because I had that arm injury. So I was only, when I worked for the Chili Peppers manager, that was probably my first, his name was Lindy Getz, and that was probably my first like foray into any kind of like entertainment job. So I always tell the story, but I mean, again, it's just reminiscent of how the industry worked back then. But I would literally like go to Anthony's house or Flea's house and deliver them a FedEx or UPS. They didn't know my name. They didn't know who I was. I was like interning, and I was getting paid on Tuesday, not Thursday. And then I eventually like said to one of the assistants there, I was like, hey, can you ask Lindy if there's any way I can get paid on Thursday? And because I'm getting paid 1 out of the 2 days a week. I mean, I don't know why. Can I get paid both days? And she came back and she said, Lindy said you can keep getting paid like this or not come back at all, And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll not come back in a little bit. So it was a rude awakening. Like, there just wasn't a lot of people that were lending a helping hand unless I had the experience or put the time into it. So, eventually I started, like I said, I worked for my cousin, I built my way up, but it was a process, right, to become an agent. Like, that's another story too, how I actually became like an agent. That didn't happen overnight either. That's an interesting story, but we may or may not have time for that.
You can jump in it right now if you want to.
Well, it was just, I kind of like, I don't know, my cousin at a certain point, we parted ways. I think that he, whatever, I didn't see a future with his company. And so
that was one that had the model agency.
Yeah. And I sort of like got hired at a small company in LA. At the time it was called United Prima Omars. And they had people like, I think maybe at some point, maybe Charlize Theron was there. I don't know. I know that like Mila Jovovich was there at some point. They had some pretty big names. When I was there, I remember when I first started working there, like Pat Malashki had come in. I think she was a client. January Jones was a client. And it was me and these two other women that were in the division. And eventually, like, they both left the division. And I was, again, still like I couldn't really tell the owner I had no experience because I got hired by telling him that I had some experience. But I really didn't. And, once the two women left that division, it was me. And like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So Hellman Newton, like, the guy across me who ran like the agency used to say, "Hey, Scotty, like Hellman Newton's in town, like call him." And I was like, "Who's that?" Like, meanwhile, if you know about fashion history, probably the most iconic photographer ever. Well, probably the most famous ever, probably the most famous fashion photographer ever, maybe. I would like call his hotel at the Chateau Marmont and be like, "Hey, like Hellman," and he'd hang up on me, and then I call him back and he'd hang up, and I was just like a drummer, so I had no fear. I didn't care. Like, I would call people because I'm like, what's the worst thing that can happen? If they don't like me, they don't have to talk to me. But part of me learning how to become an agent was just trial by fire, like literally cold calling these people and like reading the book, The Mailroom, and learning that you had to have a sense of no fear and just really confident in what you did, even if you didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was literally a musician that got thrown into being an agent without being an agent. Usually people train for a couple of years for that. That didn't really happen to me. Like, once the women I was working with left that division, I was literally left there to figure it out on my own. And it was kind of touch and go there for a moment.
Sure. I mean, honestly, so are you familiar with Wayne Hoffman? Do you know who that is?
I'm not. But
he's a mentalist and illusionist. He's pretty big as far as that particular niche goes. I interviewed him out in Florida. I had a connection to him. And he had kind of like an interesting, and I've heard people say this before, but it was just kind of profound to me, where he said he loves hearing no because the more times he hears it, also means the more yeses he's going to get. And that's kind of how it has to be, right? You have to be willing to go into these things, like being totally okay with being rejected over and over and over again, because those rejections don't have to matter at all. They really don't. It's the same way when, like, so say we were just talking about followers and stuff off air. So if all of a sudden I have 10,000 followers, it's okay if 9,000 of them don't care about something that I post, because 1,000 of them did.
Yeah.
And if I have that same 10% ratio, now all of a sudden I'm at 20,000. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of, like, you have to be okay with people not immediately loving you. And if you can kind of develop that skin of, like, well, I'm just going to keep doing my thing, eventually you're going to get heard. The squeaky wheel, right? Like, it has that kind of effect.
I mean, everything kind of goes back to music for me. So if you go on that theory, I mean, the Beatles turned down a million times, Zeppelin, like, there's no band that wasn't turned down, like, early on. And, I guess that guy that passed on the Beatles early on is probably, if he's still alive, he's probably hitting himself now, right? So, like, it happens. And that's sort of the nature of that business and music. So I came from a place where, especially in music, like, people just constantly, like, turn you down, right? Even when your band is good and you think you're the best band in the world, you may not be, but you think you are. I mean, you're definitely not getting signed the first month, year. You gotta put the work in. And so, even with my band Black Cherry, like, we did really well, but then when I say really well, we got a development deal with A&M Records, and then there was some, like, legal thing that happened between my singer and his old band, and we were like, he was suing the record label, and it was, like, so messy that we ended up not, they didn't, like, pick up the option for a full-length record. We actually never put out a record. We put out, like, a song on a record with a label called Metal Blade Records called Street Survivors that did well. It was like a local hit called The Devil in You on a radio station called KNAC back in the day. But we got turned down a ton of times. Like, your singer's this, he's this, the songs aren't this. Like, you have to develop a thick skin because, and that's what I learned how to do early on, because there's not a lot of people saying yes in the beginning, but there's a lot of people saying no.
Yeah, you have that upward trajectory, I guess, you know what I mean? That exponential growth, where all of a sudden, once a few people say yes and like you, then people like to like what other people like, and it just, like, keeps building up.
Yeah.
So music wise, from what my understanding would be, if I was in your position, maybe I'm totally off here, I would feel like if the music thing wasn't working out at that point to the degree that you wanted it to or whatever, and you start doing this stuff of your agency.
Well, it's because I had an injury, though, too. So that was really the main thing.
Sure, but a lot of times there's some kind of bump in there, something. You know what I mean? Happens that you're like, okay, well, I got to put my time focused on something, right? So you put it into this. You open this management company, One Management, out in New York. This is 2001. And then it's 10 years goes by, right? I'm sure you're still playing in the meantime, but 10 years go by before Courtney Love hears you, and then she asks you to be a part of that. You're already established at this point with your agency, right? Like, was it just because you had was it like the younger version of yourself that's like, oh, my chance is finally here, that you decided to do that? Because you certainly didn't have to.
This is a good story. This is one of my better stories. I mean, I have a lot of stories, but definitely one of my better stories in the sense that, I mean, I couldn't play drums for many years because I had this surgery that I don't think it worked, honestly. Like, I think, modern medicine has evolved. It wasn't as evolved back then. I had sort of like a carpal tunnel tennis elbow thing. They couldn't figure out what it was. I went to a lot of doctors. My mother said, hey, go to this guy at NYU. You know, when my arm still didn't work, in the sense that when I say didn't work, where I couldn't really play drums without the stick falling out or having that same sensation and the power, and, you know, when it just was working so I could play drums again, it was probably 10 years. So that led me to believe it wasn't the right surgery, obviously. They don't do surgeries on you. I'm like, you'll be better in 10 years.
Right, yeah.
If it's the right surgery, you're better whatever, right? So,
Right, 18 months is supposedly
yeah,
the
I
max
don't
amount
think
of time.
10 years is the... so that led me to believe it wasn't the right surgery. So anyway, long story short, I was having the 10-year anniversary for my company in New York that I founded, One Management, and we were going through the musical guests, you know, who we could get, because my background, it's like we needed to have a musical guest. So myself and my best friend at the time, was still one of my best friends, Robbie, we were going to play respectively drums and guitar with whoever we got. We had worked on getting Motley Crue's Vince Neil, the singer, to perform with us. And so I learned all these Motley Crue songs. I learned like Kickstart My Heart, Wild Side, like, you know, Girls, Girls, Girls. By the way, Tommy Lee's an amazing drummer. So as much as a decent drummer I think I am, those were kind of hard songs to learn. And also remember, I hadn't been playing regularly. Like I played, I don't know, maybe a year or two before the anniversary. I had started playing again a little bit, right? Like local bands, and then nothing great, you know. So maybe it was 7 years, like 8 years I couldn't play, whatever it is. I had dabbled in playing a little bit, right? So we decided that we're going to hire Vince Neil. We fly him to New York. We learn all the songs. And like, sure enough, like the day before, 2 days before, he cancels, right? We had already flown him to New York. And this was like Labor Day, September. It was like on a Sunday. I don't know. The holiday fell on like a Sunday or Monday. And the 10-year anniversary party was on a Tuesday. So me and my buddy Nur Khan, who basically is like the guru of New York nightlife and had many incredible iconic spots over the years, from the Rose Bar to now he's got a place called Butterfly. He had the Hero Ballroom, Wax. He's one of the legendary New York nightlife guys and one of my close friends. You know, and he's very tied into music. Years ago, we did a session at the Rose Bar in New York called the Rose Bar Sessions together, and we had like Guns N' Roses play, and the Black Keys would play in front of 100 people. We did it at this amazing Ian Schrager, like 100-person like bar area that was incredible. So anyway, Vince Neil cancels. We're going through all these acts, and he's like, what about Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots? And we're like, amazing, but is anyone going to know his solo material? I don't know. Like, I love STP. I'm not sure if solo STP, like Scott Weiland is like, I think we need some, like a household name that people know the songs. So Nur was friends with Courtney, and he called her, and she's like, I don't know who Scott is. I don't know what One Management is, but, you know, maybe. And then she kind of like hung up the phone, and we're like, does that mean she's going to do it? Because the show's on Tuesday and it's Sunday. So me and Robbie, because Robbie was also still manages bands, and he's a great manager and a great guitar player, we took the liberty to just, you know, Robbie was like, I'll fly in the band members, you know, like I have no choice. One's in San Francisco, one's in London. We'll just, hopefully she's going to do it. And I knew the manager because both him and I were in bands like growing up together. And so his name is JD, has a company called Crush, and he manages Green Day and Sia and host of amazing artists. And so, you know, I said, JD, you know, what's the likelihood I can play drums here with her? And he's like, I don't know, like just come to sound check and we'll figure it out. I'm like, well, I don't know if I should be learning the material. Like, there's a lot of songs to learn, and it's in like a day. Like, what do you think? So, long story short, I knew a lot of the songs. I mean, Hole was a big band when I was growing up. I mean, part of the incredible, you know, Seattle music scene, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Hole, one of the bigger bands. And so I definitely knew a lot of her hits, and I was very familiar with and a fan of some of her music. But I kind of learned it as much as I could with a day's notice, without really putting too much into it, because ultimately I didn't know if I was still going to be playing or not, right? So I think Courtney said to her bandmates, you know, go to sound check during the middle of the day. It's kind of sound check, if you guys don't know, it's like what everyone sets up in the middle of the day, and the band kind of rehearses and gets the levels okay. And she probably said to the other band members, if he's not great, I'm not coming. Like, if he's some, like, she tells his story better than I do, but she's like, if he's some sort of like Mark Jacobs on the drums, like, I'm not coming. So we play one song, and her band turns around. They're like, hey, you're like, you know, you're like a real, you're like, you might be better than our drummer. I'm like, gee, well, thanks. I don't know. I'm flattered. Thank you, you know. And then they called her, and she came down, and again, she walked in. It was like we had an instant connection because of the fashion business, and and she knew my old band, and she's like, "Oh, I heard you're like better than our drummer." I'm like, "I don't know about that, Courtney, but let's try." And I went home that night, before the party, and like sat in my bathtub and like, woodshed, put like on the whole album, like the 10 songs and whatever, and all her hits, and really tried to learn it. And we played that night, and it's on YouTube. It's like, I think when I first joined the band, it was Whole. It's like Whole live from the Hero Ballroom, whatever it was, 2001, or was it 2001? 2010, sorry, 2011. Sorry, it's COVID. The years escape me. I don't know where I'm at. Every day is the same. And sure enough, there was this incredible punk rock kinetic energy, and it was a great show. I mean, I probably made some mistakes. It was probably kind of sloppy. I was nervous as but either way, like, it was great. And I don't, that energy, that kinetic energy that we had was incredible. And then we just really hit it off. And like a month or two later, she's like, I'm playing in Brazil. It's this festival called SWU, and it's Kanye and the Black Eyed Peas, and 40,000 people. Do you want to play? And I had never played in front of like maybe like more than 1,000 people. So again, I was so fucking nervous that I almost didn't get through that gig because my arm started freezing up. Like, part of why I got the surgery, it cramped up so much. I think when you don't breathe properly, your muscles contract, and my arm was like literally the size of, it was like engulfed, like twice the size of that it should be. And it's only because we took a break, and at some point she walked off stage for something, and I was able to like rub out my arm to finish the set. If not, I wouldn't have made it through the set, and I wouldn't have been in the band. But in a long-winded answer to your question, the reason why I did it is because it was an opportunity. I always wanted to do that. I'm like, it was on my bucket list. I'm like, when am I going to get to join Courtney Love or Hole's band? Like, this wasn't in the cards for me. I was already like, whatever it was, like 38 or I don't know how old I was at the time, but I wasn't 21. And I mean, thank God, my dad never thought what I did for a living was like a real profession. They were always super supportive, but they didn't really understand. And, I don't know, 4 years ago, I flew them out here, they flew themselves, whatever it may be, and they got to see me perform at the Hollywood Bowl with Courtney when we played with Lana Del Rey on tour, and, came full circle, and definitely probably the greatest day of my life. I mean, I have the picture hanging up in my apartment, and even if I never do anything else musically again, like, that was the pinnacle maybe of my life. So, I mean, when you ask why did I do that, even though I had a successful company, like, most people don't get to do that. So, like, if that's really who you are and your lifelong dream, like, you got to take that chance when it comes.
No, absolutely. I totally understand. And I can relate to that a little bit as like owning a skateboard shop, right? A lot of people think that's just like a weird little hobby thing.
No, it's a huge industry.
Well, that, and it's a legitimate business. I own a retail store. So I shouldn't need to have to like explain to people that this is a real thing. It's
people think it's a hobby.
Yeah, it's like, well, there's a storefront, so clearly like it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So I listen to the show, so shout out to them. It's called The Bunt Live. It's a skateboarding podcast. I think it's out of Vancouver or something, but it's out of Canada. But they do this segment at the end of the show called Rapid Fire. And I've always really enjoyed it, and I've wanted to have it on the show for a while. You're going to be the first person I'm going to do that if you're cool with it.
Yeah,
so,
cool.
of course, when somebody says ask for your favorite on the spot, you're going to miss out. But so just don't worry about it being your favorite if it's just something you really enjoy, okay?
Yeah.
So here we go. Favorite meal other than sushi?
Souffle.
Favorite photographer?
I guess Helmut Newton.
I love him. Biggest hero as a kid?
Biggest hero, John Lennon is one of them, and John Bonham.
Favorite model that you've worked with?
One of them I would say is Helena Christensen, who I still work with.
Favorite rock band?
Probably Zeppelin.
Who's your favorite up-and-comer people don't know about that much yet?
Favorite up-and-comer? There is a band called The Struts that I really like. They're pretty big, but they're not like a household name, so I'd say them.
But they're gonna be. Favorite song right now?
One of the songs that we just played, Charming Mess, Black Crows.
Favorite artist, like painter?
Favorite artist, Basquiat. I mean, I love Warhol too. It's still so relevant to me. I like Jeff Koons.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did a couple with different local artists around here. Favorite fashion designer?
I would say probably McQueen, Alexander McQueen.
Favorite non-work related activity?
That would be at the moment, I guess. God, I'd have to say cooking, but I've never cooked before really COVID as much as I am now.
Cooking is a wonderful thing for the soul.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you can get great food from somebody else. Just sitting there and creating it.
It's just COVID related, though, right? Because I wouldn't have cooked if it wasn't for COVID. So.
Yeah. Wonderful. So what's your favorite COVID activity that you discovered outside of that?
I mean, Yeah, that would be the one that I've done the most. I mean, I'm definitely like, a huge fan of the Peloton now because of everything going on. I mean, it's all these things, or it's like yoga was something I always did, but then like you end up working out more when you have more time, and you just do things like that. I mean, I think I always have been a little bit into fitness, but between the fitness stuff I've been doing and the cooking stuff, and I don't know how much more TV I could consume. Probably not more than I already do. But you just pick up things, especially when you're at home for like a year and a half, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, TV in general is difficult for me, just because, and I'm sure you're in the same position where you always have more on your plate than you really have time to consume.
Yeah.
So you have to prioritize and say, well, what do I really have time for? And fitting in something like TV is really hard for me to actually do, because I'll have the stuff that I work on, I enjoy so much that I end up being a workaholic that way. I just want to be working on different things, even if it's just like painting, because I paint a lot.
Yeah.
I still sell my paintings, and it's still kind
That's
of
cool.
a work thing in a way, but I always have to try to find time to do it, and TV ends up getting in my way. So I don't
Well, when
really
I say
do that.
TV, right, I'm like a huge documentary fan, things like that. So I mean, like I'm encompassing film in that too, right? So it's not
Sure.
just like not sitting around watching just like the Brady Bunch and
Yeah, but I mean,
Seinfeld or whatever it is.
that's involved in your work too,
Yeah.
though, right? Because
Yeah.
you obviously work with people that are in
Yeah,
entertainment
totally,
as a whole.
totally.
So career-wise right now, right? And I want to, I guess, we'll start with this. But career-wise right now, I know COVID's really messing things up, but where are you in the trajectory of what you're trying to do as of this moment?
Yeah, I mean it's cool. You got to pivot, right? You got to pivot in a time like this. So I've been fortunate to did a couple little interesting deals where we have some nice people working with us now, and the company's expanding a little bit. So look, we've been okay. I mean, I think everyone that could qualify got a PPP loan, and we're all doing what we can to pivot and survive. So I'm growing my company. I really, really believe in the content space. So obviously, I'm super involved in the podcast space. And music, I don't know when music will come back. I mean, I'm just sort of doing these other things. I mean, for instance, my business is really focused now, especially with what I do, on the digital side of the business, right? So, we represent models, we represent celebrities. The one area that I saw sort of expanding and growing during COVID was digital, because people aren't doing traditional ad buys. They're not taking out, like, if you looked at like magazine, the magazine business the last year and a half, like there wasn't a lot of ads. People were afraid to spend money. People were really afraid to spend a lot of money for celebrities, which is another thing that I do. I do a lot of endorsements. So, brands that have $300,000, $1 million, $500,000, they want to spend it on a celebrity. They're like, you know what? We don't know what the is going on in this world. We're going to hold off. We want to see how the market bounces. If it bounces back, if people are going to go into stores and shop, should we spend our money on this? But the one area which has been interesting, which, is really exciting, is digital. So that's not going anywhere. And secretly, I'm also working on a very cool app that I can't talk about yet. I can just tell you I'm working on it. But when I have it done, I'll let you know. But that's something I'm excited about too. But I'm always trying to evolve, like we spoke about, and progress. And because I think you have to just, to evolve as a human being and evolve what you're doing work-wise. Like, I'm someone that needs other stimulation. Like, I just, if I only stayed in that one lane representing the people I did years ago, like that business changed drastically, the fashion modeling business, right? And I saw the influencer thing coming years ago, and I was like, that's a good lane for me. Like, I understand where that's going. And as I mentioned to you, Chris, like, I didn't really make money with that side of the business for the first couple of years. People didn't want to pay for it. But now look where we are, right? I don't know who's like Kylie Jenner, one of the youngest billionaires. And I mean, that's the influencer business, right? So, a lot of those people now make more than a lot of the models. They want personalities now with something to say. They want, people that have a point of view. They want someone that has a different hobby, skill set. There's more to the story now. They want a story. So that's what I'm always trying to figure out and work with people that have that story now.
Right. So you're in the position right now where I would assume if you really wanted to, like if you look at how cheap real estate is where I'm at, you could just say F it and then go chill and play drums by the beach or whatever and relax, not really do anything. I assume you just have higher aspirations, which is part of the reason you're still doing it. But I got to ask you this. Now that like you're kind of in the position where making money for as far as like living isn't really the concern, right? It's about doing things you really want to do. Like, why? What's making it so worth it to do the stuff outside of the music? Is because you love bringing up other people? Like what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, I do like helping people. I will say, like, when people ask me before, like, what is it that you get out of your job, right? If you can take someone that would normally make 30 grand a year and help them be a millionaire, like, amazing. No one ever did that for me when I was growing up. That's an incredible thing to give back and help people do well. course, whatever, you cut off a little sliver if you're part of that process, right? And you definitely benefit a little bit from it. But I think, again, karmically, you help people do well in this world. It's a great feeling. I'm just a workaholic. Like, I don't know, like, I couldn't be retired now because I don't know what I would do with myself. Like, I'm just someone that always needs to work and hustle and network. And, could I do a lot of other things? Sure. Like, I always liked the fashion business, but for me, it was about the entertainment business. That's what was interesting to me, Fashion was cool, but entertainment was very cool.
Is it more just because you really enjoy throwing the events and stuff like that?
I'm a pop culture junkie. Like, I love film, music, fashion, documentaries, TV, like all kinds of fast art, So yeah, that's what inspires me, like the whole world, And I like networking and I love people. Like, I'm an extrovert, so this time has also been very hard. Like, I'm not a person that wants to sit in my house by myself. Like, I'm not married, so for me to sit with Milo, my dog, in my house alone for like a year and a half, it sounded like a death sentence. I was like, this is not who I am. Like, I need to, I just, my friends know, like, I started early in the morning and I keep going. Like, I mean, whatever, we're here now, it's the end of the day, but I've also done 20 things since the beginning of the day. I worked a bunch, played tennis at 7 a.m. with a friend. I've done a million other work things. I did a million other, like, I'm just constantly busy, even when you're not busy, I found a way to just create a schedule for myself. It gives me structure, and structure, I think, in a time like this is important for people that like that, and just stay busy, right? Because, like, I don't know, like, I'm not a doom and gloom person. I'm not like, I'm just going to wait for the world to end. I'm going to try and make shit happen.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? When you have structure, it makes you feel human.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just kind of sitting there and you're
Exactly.
like, what am I doing with my time?
Exactly.
And then I have a thing. I feel like it's the fear of missing out to a certain degree, of like fear of missing out of my own success, of like looking back and saying, well, why did I not use that time more wisely? If I would have used it to do X, Y, or Z, I could be sitting in a totally different position now.
Yeah.
And I hate that feeling. So I feel like I always want to be running because of that.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end of the show. So I always like to at least share one story. I've kind of ran out of stories because I've been doing this for, a minute.
Yeah.
But if you had one more story that you could share with us, something that you're just really grateful for, it's not playing with Courtney Love, although that's incredibly awesome. What's one other unique story that is just like something that you're really grateful happened, but only happened because you're doing all of these projects?
Well, I touched on the Hollywood Bowl already. That's one of my favorite stories. I touched on the fact that I was a driver and how I started. Yeah, I mean, even like, I guess, even this podcast business, right? Like, I'm grateful that this is people are starting to recognize that I'm doing this, and there's been a good amount of press and everything. But even that, I kind of fell into, like, I mean, I'm buddies with Randy Jackson. Truth be told, he lives in my building. And, I did a couple of these episodes because I met these guys from Dash Radio and, like, give it a try. And I think I was pretty bad because after I did one or two, the guy's like, yeah, like, he wasn't like, yeah, you're on the air Fridays at 3. He was like, yeah, like, well, don't call us, kid. We'll call you, And Randy and I are like homies. We're good friends. And so I invited him again. I pulled a favor. I'm like, dude, will you come on my, like, this? I mean, it's not nothing yet, but like my podcast / radio show. And, I didn't really even have a radio show then. Maybe it was like the first episode that I think they were giving me a shot. And he came on and he was so great. He's so gracious. He's so engaging. That you've had like, I don't know how many guests, 30 guests now or something?
No, this is season 5, so you're
50,
number 40 something.
All right, so 40. So, like, whatever. I don't know if I'm engaging, but when people are engaging, it makes for a better interview, right? And I've definitely had, like, major bands that, like, sometimes you get, like, a one-word answer, and you're like, how am I going to...
how do you work with that?
People are going to leave, change the station or tune into another podcast, whatever it may be, right? So Randy was incredible. I'm very thankful. I don't think I would have a podcast / show if it wasn't for him. I didn't really have to talk. He was just so good. He's had a bunch of radio shows, American Idol, obviously. He's got a new show now called Name That Tune on Fox. Like, if it wasn't for how good he was, when the guy heard it, he was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Afterwards, he liked it. Nothing to do with me, by the way. Just the fact that Randy was so great. So, yeah, that's a cool thing that happened. I mean, I don't, it's not that I wanted to name drop, but I mean, I would not have this podcast / radio show. I don't think if it wasn't for the fact that Randy Jackson is a good human and a great guest.
Yeah. Well,
so, shout out to RJ.
I actually think that some of the best hosts on shows in general are the ones that know when to shut their mouths, right?
Yeah.
If you have somebody who's on there, sometimes you hear those hosts that just like constantly interrupt. And you're like, dude, I listened to you in every episode already. I don't need to listen to you right now because you have this awesome person talking. Just shut up.
Yeah,
So-
my probably the 2-second funny story I'll leave you with too is like I had on David Lee Roth from Van Halen, who's such an iconic rock singer, but I don't know. It was a funny story. Like he almost didn't do the show, then he did it. I don't know if I got a word in 2 hours. Like I might have asked like 3 questions. Like he basically talked for almost 2 hours straight. I had to edit it, but even if you listen to it now, there's very little of me. It's like one run-on sentence for like an hour and a half. But hey, man, he's so entertaining that I guess like I didn't even need to talk. It was weird because I had like 30 pages of notes, but I can't say that I asked more than 5 questions in almost 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's different every time, right? Like
Yeah.
you when I asked for your summary at the very beginning, you went into a lot more detail that I was expecting to go through and read through.
Yeah.
But it ended up working out great. So what I just also want to say again, thank you for coming on. And I'm not quite done. There's a little bit more. But I want to say this is something unique that's happened to me that I wasn't expecting. I started this show out in my zone, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, town of 60-some thousand people, where I was interviewing other local entrepreneurs for the most part. And then it grew, and I'm like, well, I want to talk to these people. I met this fashion photographer. Opportunity came out. Now I've been out in LA all week interviewing all these people that I never thought I'd be able to meet.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting with you on this rooftop at the new house in Hollywood, and I'm how did I get here from like Eau Claire to here all of a sudden? And now I'm flying to Florida right after this. So pretty special when you work hard, when you can see what kind of opportunities then pop up from it.
Totally.
I do want to address, because I always ask this one too, everyone makes mistakes over time, and people who make mistakes tend to learn a lot of things that end up being really beneficial.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who end up being really successful, because the people who don't make any mistakes, they just kind of like slowly grow, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot longer. What's a mistake that you made that you learned something from that somebody listening right now can benefit from?
You know, honestly, I would say my biggest thing in life, like I never had that CFO next to me in all these things I've started. I've started like this second company, but a bunch of different ventures, right? And like my best friend has this incredible CFO, and like you're not going to have every brain. Like I think I have the creative brain. I think I have the artistic brain. I might have the image brain. I don't necessarily have the spreadsheet, you know, the PowerPoint, the financial brain. I have a financial brain to a certain extent, but like I think you have to partner up sometimes with people that are experts in what they do, and I always wanted that. And along the way, I still haven't found my like yin to the yang of that financial person that could help me grow all these things I'm doing. Because I do it on my own, but it's hard to do everything. Like I have a great team, but I still want to find that financial person that I can grow all these things with together, because it is very hard to be like an expert at everything, you know? So my biggest advice would be, if you're going to start a business, see if you can find a partner who complements you in a sense that things that you don't already have, right? Because I know what I think my strong points are and my weaknesses are, and definitely, I mean, my brother helped me for years, but my brother like works, he does his own thing. So, you know, it's good to have that, and a lot of people I know that have done really well always have that counterpart. So that's something I still would love to have.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at a team, right? And yes, you can still be the captain of the team if that's how you want things to be structured.
Yeah.
But how successful can Tom Brady possibly be by himself?
Exactly.
He can't.
Yeah, it's all about your
You
team.
have to have the team that's built around
100%. I'm sure at your store you got someone great like running it when you're not there, right?
Yep. I got somebody editing my show, and then I had Max taking photos of the show.
Totally.
There's like always people that are going to be involved for sure. So moving forward again, how can people follow you? How can they best support you? Because people are going to now listen to this and go, okay, Scott Lipp sounds way better. I want to go listen to his show.
Awesome.
How can people follow you and support you moving forward?
Well, I don't think they're going to say I sound better than you, but I think you can. The show's on Spotify. It's called Lip Service. It's on Spotify. It's on iTunes, any platform, Anchor, whatever platform you listen to. I think we're on our 4th or 5th season. This past month, it's like Papa Roach, Greta Van Fleet, Tommy Hilfiger, a bunch of great guests. So it's up. You know, a lot of the shows are up already. And then social media at Scott Lips, SCOTTLIPPS. That's really it. I mean, if you want to check out my website, it's www.lips.la, but who knows if I'll even change the name, you know? So I would say social media and check out the show. And if you like the show, rate and review it on iTunes. You know, that's super important, because the more reviews we get on iTunes, the more that it populates. And then, you know, instead of getting 5,000 or 10,000 downloads, you might get 50,000, you know? So I always tell people, like I literally get an Uber and I'm like, hey, whatever you know, if you could rate and review my show on iTunes, that'd be great. And I'll give you 5 stars and I'll review you too. So I'm like trading 5 stars for a 5-star iTunes review, you know? So yeah, I mean, it's all a hustle still years later. Here we are.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Passion Pod. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We'll see you soon.